You're listening to Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong, all on Georgia Radio Network.
Welcome to episode 57 of the Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong podcast. With me, Jessica Szilagyi.
Hello, everyone.
Matt Lowe has been sent off for firewood.
Literally, he's chopping wood.
Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. He had to go get firewood, so he couldn't record this evening.
So it's just us.
So the commentary will definitely be more intelligent.
No
Jessica, how's your
lands.
week?
My week's been good. It's been slightly less busy again because the legislature's just burning days like we talked about last week. So it's kind of been a lull. And then as this airs, they will be jamming every last thing down our throats for the last 4 days. How about you?
Spring's here. Business starting to pick up. So that feels good. You know, when you work for somebody else, you have to go to work. When you work for yourself, you get to go to work.
Right.
Nothing scarier than, sleeping in on a Wednesday, because that means that there's no money coming in.
Right. That's true.
We're going to start this off with some good news.
I think we owe it to our listeners because I don't know if it was our last episode or the one before that, but it was depressing as hell. So I think we owe them this.
Yeah, we do have some Debbie Downers. It just ends with everything sucks and everybody's horrible.
Right. So this is our gift to you.
The Arkansas legislature voted unanimously in both chambers to abolish, I can't speak, asset forfeiture.
Woo! I am so excited about this, and I think that it's the only state that's ever passed this type of legislation unanimously. Although the environment is perfect for them to do it. They have the cover in every which direction other than probably law enforcement. But the people are behind them on this.
How can Kansas be out front on an issue that we're not in on?
I don't know. I read this article that was saying that 31 states over the last, decade or so, maybe not that long, maybe 5 years. There's Dave and I with our excellent facts again. Very accurate.
Say it with confidence, you'll be fine.
Right. But anyway, in the last several years, 31 states have reformed their asset forfeiture laws. But reform is not abolish. And it, like we talked about with Georgia, they didn't actually reform anything. They just set a state standard so that everyone had to do the asset forfeiture the same way. We didn't actually do anything to further protect people's rights. We just streamlined the process, which is what most states have done. I think there's only Arkansas, when the governor signs this, it will be the 4th. So, but it's crazy. It's Arkansas, North Carolina, New Mexico, and Nebraska. Not national players for justice reform or liberty or anything. They're just clunking along, winning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been to Arkansas once. I made a wrong turn in Memphis, crossed the wrong bridge, and there I was in Arkansas, turned around and went back to Memphis. But this bill is beautiful.
Right.
It requires prosecutors to obtain a criminal conviction to forfeit property.
I like how general it is. Property.
Absolutely.
And then I think the only time there's an exception is if someone's deceased, deported, or they flee, or they fail to challenge it. Which is fair. I mean, the deceased part I could probably argue because family and I don't know how, I haven't read the bill, so I don't know for sure, but even if it is deceased and your surviving relatives don't have a chance at it, the bill overall is tremendously better than the practices we see everywhere else. So I can settle for now.
For perspective, our legislature between the two houses passed 300 bills collectively to send to each other. And not one of them is rights restoring like this.
Right.
And when I say rights restoring, restricting the authority of government, which is what it was always supposed to be.
I think you bring up a really good point that we all can agree on, but I don't think people we talk about how bad government is, but I don't think people truly understand the magnitude of restricting government. Like the last time we did that in Georgia, I think was in 2014 with regard to a gun bill that passed, and it's not a standalone bill, and then it was put into its own comprehensive bill that passed in 2014. That was like the mega gun bill. But that bill took like years of convincing people that it was the right thing to do to restrict the authority of the state. So the fact that this passed unanimously, like, it's huge. It doesn't happen.
Right. That means R's, D's, L's, and I's all got together and said, this is wrong. And that's one of those, I say things like bipartisan is a scary word, and it usually is. Now, this sounds, now again, they're politicians. They'll do something next week that's totally messed up. But, given this day, that's a win. That's a win for the people of Arkansas.
And I hope other states continue to do this. I mean, it's not the same premise by any means, but you look at the heartbeat bill and a couple states passed it, and now, we're literally seeing it everywhere. I hope that this type of momentum continues for these types of pushes around the country too, because this is up to the states. This is a state thing. Even with the Supreme Court decision that we talked about, it's not going to overturn these state laws like this.
Right. The Supreme Court doesn't apply to civil asset forfeiture because it was applied specifically to excessive fines.
Right.
So, we talked about it when we talked about that case, was it's going to be applied very, very, very narrowly. This, yes, I would like to see it catch fire, but I really think that the Sheriff's Association has too much sway up there.
In Georgia?
Yeah. In the legislature. It is a lobbying group.
They're very powerful. Probably the most powerful.
Yeah, when the sheriffs show up, there's a bunch of them walking around the Capitol, and the legislators are looking around going, what the hell are all the sheriffs doing here? So yeah, they're very, very powerful, and if enough of them say, no, we need to hold on to this because this is how we fight crime, and this is how we, honestly, how they fund their departments. I don't know. I don't see it. Some of our senators and certainly some of our reps have 3 or 4 county sheriffs in their districts, all pressuring them.
And I'm sure that feels like a lot, but the police chiefs aren't, but the sheriffs are elected too. We don't really hold them accountable for what they do with the civil forfeiture. We expect the state legislatures to. When was the last time anyone went to their sheriff and said, please stop doing this? They just wait for the law to be changed. They don't understand that the sheriffs have the power to do it, but they're not required to. You could push for a sheriff to not do this, but nobody does that.
Sure. That's when the question came up in a debate for District 19. Even the folks that were running were kind of wishy-washy on it, going, well, we've got to fund those departments somehow.
Yeah, what a great way to fund law enforcement other than violating people's rights. Lord.
Yeah, well, and I don't think that we have as much of a issue out where I am certainly with just civil asset forfeiture. We're just looking for cash, but they certainly, if you get, like I just saw the picture on the hood of a police car out here with the big stack of weed, meth, mushrooms, a scale, and stack of cash. Well, yeah, that one's probably gonna be forfeited. It does sound like a hell of a party, though. I don't know where that guy was going, but I want to go.
I know.
Okay.
So enough of the good news.
Well, we're into the SCOTUS edition. What has SCOTUS agreed to hear for us this week?
A number of things, surprisingly.
They have agreed to hear the case. And I'm going to try not to twist the words and just slap me if I do. States are trying to abolish the insanity defense, and the Supreme Court has agreed to hear the case against the states doing away with the insanity defense. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes.
Because you already know what I'm talking about.
Yes. So I'm looking at our outline here, and what you're saying and what I've written on the outline totally makes sense. So, Kansas passed a law that said a defendant can only show evidence of a mental illness to prove he or she lacked the required intent to commit murder, regardless of whether the mental illness kept them from knowing their actions were wrong, which is very convoluted, if you ask me, but nobody does.
Yeah, but you tell us anyway.
Absolutely.
You know, the legal standard for years of criminal insanity, legal insanity, is you did not know what you were doing was wrong, you know, in case of temporary at the time.
And you can't just claim it. You have to prove it.
Right. I believe they call it an affirmative defense. You have to go in and admit that you did it.
Right. So you assume a risk in doing that, I think.
You do. I actually had a psychology professor once tell me that if she ever gets caught killing somebody, she can strip herself naked and bathe in his blood and just walk down the street holding the knife.
She sounds like a great lady.
Well, she was demonstrating the insanity is you're proud of what you did. It's not, you didn't try to hide it.
Right.
It's what I guess we'll get at is you lack the mental capacity to know the difference right from wrong.
That's the most succinct way to put it. And this is the first that I've heard of this case, and I didn't know that there were 4 other states that have this law. So 5 total. But I want to know what happened that put states in a position that they said, we want to eliminate a possible defense to crimes. Like, we have people, especially in a time when we're talking about the role that mental health plays in our healthcare and our criminal justice system, and how we're jailing people who need mental health services. You know what I mean? Like, this is the fact that there's 5 states that are doing this is very odd to me.
You know, and again, this is not crazy. I'm crazy. I know the difference from right and wrong. I can't see the moral side of jailing somebody that did not have the capacity to tell right from wrong. And, you know, to give you an image, think of Mice and Men. And Lenny didn't have the intent, didn't know what he was doing, you know, and the whole point of the, you know, the friendship and to the end of it, and I know Lenny eventually has to die in the book, but you take these people and you put them into places that can care for them. You know, a place where they can certainly not lock them in a prison where with limited mental capacity they're just waiting victims. You know, in a jail population. I mean, I know when I was in prison, that's how it was.
Of course. And that's one of the reasons I love having you on the show, because you can offer that perspective of the inside. Exactly.
You have to carry your shiv in your prison wallet.
But in all seriousness, going back to, once you do incarcerate them, people, the biggest hurdle for having honest discussions about what we should quote, do with people in the justice system is the insensitivity that surrounds it. But can you put a mentally incapacitated person in with general population and expect them to survive? There are people who would say, well, why does that matter? Why do we care? They committed a crime. They're a murderer. They're a rapist. I have a person down here who's in the court system, and their family has contacted me a number of times because of some stuff with the courts and everything. But basically he's not a kid. I think he's 20. But he's completely dependent on his family, his parents. One of them is trying to get guardianship over him because he cannot function in society. He's committed a crime. It was of a sexual nature. It wasn't rape or anything, but it was a sexual crime. And he doesn't have the cognitive ability to understand that what he did was wrong. He doesn't understand why he's in jail. Every day he calls his family and says, why am I here? What did I do? When am I coming home? Like, he has no comprehension, and he's been in jail for months and months and months. And, does that person need, I know that we don't have this law in Georgia right now, but this SCOTUS decision will definitely have an influence on it. But it begs the question, like, do we want that person who is that mentally incapacitated to not have a legal defense? I mean, we don't prosecute children, and this person has the mind of a child. We don't prosecute children the same way we prosecute adults.
And maybe releasing him to his mother is not the right thing. But maybe the right thing is an inpatient treatment facility. Not know the specifics of the case, or, again,
of course,
not a lawyer.
Of course.
Not a lawyer, went to air-conditioned medical school. So, but
one of the questions is, do you understand the charges that are being brought before you when you go to court for arraignments and things? This person can't answer that question. And there are a lot of people like that. And I understand that we're talking about that versus insanity or mental illness or all these. I mean, there's a lot of different, this isn't a blanket thing, a one size fits all. But there's a reason that the courts established that a long time ago,
Yeah, and I find the issues to be intertwined.
Right.
Either way, diminished mental capacity and insanity are essentially the same thing. You didn't understand what you were doing. This doesn't apply to people who eat bath salts and then try to eat somebody's face.
Right.
This is people who have true mental illness, and it is just that. It is an illness, and the more we try to treat it as something else, the harder it is for us to really address it as a society and as a country.
It'll be interesting. I mean, the attorney has said, of course, to be in front of SCOTUS, they had to come up with the constitutional aspect, and they said, under the 8th Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment and the 14th Amendment's right to due process, and Kansas is saying that they have the discretion to determine how they define crimes, admit evidence, and create affirmative defenses. I don't know. I think that's a tough sell. I think it's a tough sell to say that someone's mental capacity to understand what's going on around them, is it evidence? I guess that will be the question.
And the other question is it exceptionally cruel to punish somebody for something they don't understand?
Right.
I mean, that's...
Why don't we charge a 3-year-old with reckless endangerment when they pick up their parent's gun and shoot another little kid? I mean, that has happened, and we don't charge them because they can't understand. They can't admit to guilt.
Right.
It's the same concept. I don't know.
Yeah, and I know the long pauses are great radio, but it really is. It's a tough thing to find the right word, because of course we want, if you harm somebody else, I want you punished.
Right.
But I think the child aspect is a great comparison to that. You don't, the 3-year-old example is very good. They have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea what they're holding. And something bad happened. The question comes in, what do we do with the people once we find them criminally insane or diminished mental capacity? I mean, Obviously, in the case of the 20-year-old down there, I don't know that you want to hand him back over to his mother and put him back on the street.
Yeah, if someone's dangerous, they're dangerous, whether they're mentally incapacitated or not. But we've got a mental health problem. Like, if both sides will agree to that, it's just no one will actually figure out what to do.
I blame One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as the beginning of the end of the inpatient treatment facilities. Because it was painted as being such a horrible and cruel place to be locked up that you started seeing state facilities closed, like Milledgeville. Mm-hmm. Those facilities did two things. One, it protected the person who has mental illness from society and protect society from that person without subjecting them to prison.
It was supposed to be more humane. I don't know if it was.
I don't know if, and I think there's a lot of hyperbole that goes into that. But yeah, the science of mental illness and psychology have come a long way from, lobotomies and electroshock therapy.
Right.
So as far as giving an answer, I don't know. The constitutionality of it, I think locking someone up who doesn't have the capacity to understand what happened is cruel and unusual.
And I think my prediction is that the Supreme Court will rule that you cannot eliminate even a portion of someone's, people have the right to claim whatever their defense was. You can't limit the way someone defends themselves. That's an infringement, in my opinion, which is excellent.
I agree, but they do it every day.
I know.
They throw out evidence. They suppress evidence. Juries never hear things until after they're released, and then they find they hear about other pieces of evidence that was not allowed to be presented to them. Well, besides suppressing evidence, should the court or should the law be able to tell a defendant how to put their story out, how to frame their defense, and using an affirmative defense and giving the jury an excuse, a reason that it happened or what happened? I don't see how they can legally do that. But I'm not in line for the Supreme Court anytime soon.
Even if they stack it?
Even if they stack it, I think I'm probably going to be left out.
Crap. I'd love to have a Supreme Court justice on the podcast.
I'd put Ruth Bader Ginsburg on my knee like howdy doody. Little frail 90-pound woman sit on my knee.
Speaking of frail people and on your knee, let's talk about children in the Supreme Court, another case.
Frail people on my knee. It's the worst transition I've heard in a while.
I'm really struggling. I've been struggling this whole episode, but it's okay.
Yeah, I'm running on 3 hours sleep myself. Supreme Court agrees to hear the case of the deadly D.C. sniper. John Malvo was the younger of the two snipers. He was 17 at the time of being sentenced, a minor, I think 16 at the time of the shootings. He was sentenced to, 4 life sentences, something like that, without the possibility of parole. They are arguing that... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's been recent, I think it was this year, a Supreme Court decision that said, or maybe it was the end of last year, but decisions have come out saying that crimes committed as minors, whether they're legally minors, like under the prosecution, because sometimes they prosecute 16, 17-year-olds as adults. If they're under the age of 18 at the time they commit their crime, you cannot sentence them to life in prison. And so it's changed a lot of sentences for a lot of people. But this one is, these two put the fear of God in 3 states for several weeks right after 9/11.
And like most rulings, I don't think that ruling was all encapsulating, that you can't. I think it left spots out there for particularly heinous crimes, the way I read it. Just to refresh everybody's memory, Malvo and his mentor, Muhammad, who was 41, shot people during a 3-week period as they pumped gas, loaded packages into their cars, and went about their everyday business. Muhammad was executed in 2009, which he was put in the fast lane, buddy.
He really was. I mean, the trial was rather swift too, wasn't it? I mean, I was still in school at the time, but I remember it was on the news every morning. But I feel like they were both tried fairly quickly.
And if I recall correctly, they had a bunch of courtroom antics and stuff. They didn't mount much of a defense, and I think he pulled a Timothy McVeigh where he didn't. I mean, he got his mandatory appeals, but he didn't push it. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you're gonna put him down, might as well do it as quickly as possible, just for cost's sake.
Absolutely, that's one of the biggest criticisms of the death penalty is how insanely expensive it is.
You know, and tying this back up to the first story is, you have to wonder, going back in, if his defense would have been different, saying he was under the influence of this much older man. That says mentor here, and we'll never know. We'll never know the truth.
Right.
But how much did he understand of what was happening?
I don't know, but
come on, give me an answer. How much?
I know. Well, I was just reading a quote from the article, because the appeals courts are the ones that said, you know, the Supreme Court needs to decide if it would, you know, a lot of these, yes, they overturn a specific case, but it's in the interest of overturning like bigger issues. This one is very specific because it's talking about this case from 2002 and whether or not crimes reflect permanent incorrigibility, which I did not know that word before all of this, but
incorrigibility?
Yes.
I was called incorrigible quite often in my youth.
But that's the whole point, is about the youth, and saying that, you know, were these crimes a result of them being immature? If so, then he's entitled to a sentence of a short life without parole, or shorter sentence without, you know, even if it's without parole.
And it is noted in the article, this does not mean he's getting out anytime soon.
Right.
He's been in 17 years, I guess, if I count all my fingers and toes, he's about 34 now. He's not getting out. Even if this were overturned, he wouldn't be getting out for another 40 years. And it really, I think the only thing it would do is, now I could be wrong, is change his sentence from without possibility of parole to with the possibility of parole. And
then they would continuously deny it.
Right. So it could have the same effect. And as time passes, when it's 2050, and you know, and 2002 is way in the rearview mirror, the people hearing the parole case don't remember
right.
those shootings. You may see something else, but Dahmer was eligible for parole. Right. I mean, it's just not going to, it may just never happen.
This is one of those things, though, that irritates me about the law, because what we're asking here is for an exception. Like, we just overturned something with the Supreme Court, and now we're asking to poke holes in that by determining whether or not this was so egregious that they should be the exception. Like, it's just a conversation in this case where you might be on the side of lock them up, don't ever let them out. I mean, I can totally respect that, but it speaks to a bigger problem that we're constantly poking holes in our own laws so that we're constantly having to ask questions like this. Like, well, we did this and we said this, but was this an exception? Was it so bad that we need to give this different treatment? It causes so many problems on down the road for the next person that is 16 or 17 and murders a bunch of people over 3 weeks as a mentor. Are we going to have to ask the question again? Well, who's going to decide if their youth was the cause? I don't know.
Well, and that's interesting, is had the Columbine shooters lived.
Where would they be?
Right. I mean, would they be locked up without the possibility of parole, or would they get a chance to get back out, albeit as old men? And I guess it goes to the other question of does it deter the crime, future crimes, and in this case, I do not think it does.
For all intents and purposes, these two were terrorists.
Right? No, exactly what they were.
Yeah, I mean,
and
these weren't just murder. This wasn't some guy who was in a gang and murdered some. This is not.
Well, absolutely, terror was the motivation. Mm-hmm. And look, people were calling them snipers. They were not snipers. Sniper is a honorable profession.
Right.
These were ruthless murderers and terrorists. But as far as you make a good point about equal protection and applying things evenly across the board. If you're going to say that someone who is 16 does not have the legal capacity to make life or death decisions, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you're going to let...
Well, we kind of had this conversation briefly last week in the state when a bill was proposed, and this has nothing to do with murder, but with a bill that was proposed to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to be vaccinated without their parents' consent. My opposition to it has nothing to do with vaccines, but the fact that we talk about 16 and 17-year-olds in so many different capacities and so many different restrictions on what they can do and when they're an adult and some things they can do without consent. Like, this is just another one of those things where the states don't apply everything equally. We have all these different laws and literally no one knows. Like, we're constantly debating what the age of consent is depending on the circumstance. It either is or it isn't. You either have, like, you either are an adult or you're not. You're either a minor or you're not. Stop.
And I made that point with when we had Allison Feliciano on, which was talking about someone's old enough to go serve in the military, but they can't buy a beer. And I said, well, I guess you're for dropping the age of age to buy alcohol. Because you're either an adult or you're not. You've reached the age of majority or you haven't, and I agree. Man, I don't know. Yeah, I'm with you that leaving things fluid like that, judicially fluid, does leave things open for interpretation, and then we get into more and more court cases trying to define exactly where is the point where this person was just young and made a mistake, or this person grabbed a 30-06 and found a grassy knoll and murdered somebody. So that's two cases that we don't know. Let's go for a third. Kansas again.
I was kind of surprised by how much traction Kansas is getting in the Supreme Court. Like, it's not really fair. We've got problems here.
Well, I know. We got...
for the rest of us.
We got Arkansas, Kansas, and Kansas.
Right. But this Kansas has Trump behind them.
Dun, dun, dun.
So.
Seeking jurisdiction over identity theft crimes at the federal level. Kansas, backed by the Trump administration and 10 other states, wants to be able to prosecute immigrants for identity theft and other crimes when they use other people's social security numbers to work in the United States.
This is super interesting to me. So, in 2017, the Kansas Supreme Court they issued a ruling that voided convictions of 3 restaurant workers because a 1986 law which was the Immigration Reform and Control Act, read that states cannot use federal documentation for state prosecutions, which was the I-9 form. It's a federal authorization form.
Right.
For working. And so they're saying that they had the state can't enforce identity theft crime or identity theft laws in the state based on evidence of federal paperwork. Only federal law enforcement officers can do so. My favorite part about this is that the law that Kansas is challenging was signed by Reagan because it just shuts up the partisanship of this.
Yeah, Reagan did a few things in 1986 that I wasn't happy with. This was one of them, where he signed an immigration law with the agreement that they would secure the border, which they never did. This is also happens to be the year that his machine gun ban for individuals went into effect.
Right.
So everybody who keeps putting those memes on Facebook touting how great Reagan was for gun owners and how much he loved guns, not so much. He also stumped for the Brady Bill, and he also signed a Gun Control Act as governor of California. But anyway, that's back on a hog trail. That's whenever I see the Reagan worship, I like to remind people that, look, he was a very good foreign policy president. His domestic stuff wasn't the smallest of government ideals. Anywho.
No, he wasn't.
Back on Kansas. We're not in Kansas anymore. Wow, boy, I think I did just come out of the closet right there.
Yeah.
Got my ruby slippers on.
They're clicking. This is a really interesting conversation that I don't really know if I have an opinion on it. Like, tying it back to the state legislature, because I think it's something that people can maybe understand on a more basic level. Like when we were talking about all this gun control in the Georgia legislature a few weeks ago with the Senate bill with temporary restraining orders and everything, the Lautenberg Amendment that they tried to put at the state level, like the whole argument by law enforcement at the state level was, hey, we can't enforce this federal law. So yes, domestic violence, forfeiture and stuff for guns and those who have restraining orders is federal law, but we are state law enforcement officers and we are not authorized to enforce it. So we need you to mimic the federal law at the state level. This is similar to that in that, but they're actually asking for an exception. They just want to be able to prosecute identity theft crimes. Is this going to open the door to be able to prosecute all federal crimes or just those related to immigration?
Well, I'll take it to the one thing that I do know, which is fishing. I was boarded by state wildlife officials 50 miles offshore. State waters are 5. And they have the authority to enforce federal law, federal limits, and in federal waters. So if the federal government is willing to do it on one side, and what they were looking for was to see if we had any illegal fish so they could fine us. And I think the states keep the fines on that. That's why they...
What? Are you kidding? That's shocking.
I know when that happened in Alabama, because they have such little coast, they went from having one boat to like 20. It's like they had a population explosion of G-dubs, game wardens. But, tying it back into this case is they absolutely, because there's only one U.S. Fish and Wildlife boat, goes from Pensacola all the way over to Pascagoula, Mississippi. And that's a lot of territory. They have the states out there in federal waters enforcing their law outside of their state. So I don't see why or how you would restrict Kansas from prosecuting for identity theft.
I don't know much about the circuit or the appeals court. It's out of our region, so I don't really know much about it. But it doesn't... I don't know. I don't know if I'm opposed. I don't really have a position. I'm just interested to see where it goes.
It is, and it's being used as a proxy war on illegal immigration. When really
that's popular.
Yeah, it is. It is, but really the question is should somebody be using your name and social security number? And if they are, can the state prosecute them? Because if you're waiting for the FBI to do it, it ain't going to happen.
Oh, I totally agree with that. And I think identity theft is something that is concrete enough. Like, it's not there's actually a victim. It's something that is plaguing our states and nation overall. So if the state wants to assume the cost of pursuing this and prosecuting people, I'm inclined to say let them. Like, there's an actual victim. They're not just chasing ponies here.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think you're right on the cost is the state will absorb the cost of investigating, housing, trying, and then incarcerating these individuals. Because they are not ICE, they can't deport them. All they can do is convict them and give them a sentence.
Right.
I think that they might have been better served without Trump support.
It's probably true.
And it's not an anti-Trump or pro-Trump statement. It's just if you let them stand on their own. The Supreme Court doesn't like the executive branch sticking their nose in their business, regardless of the executive.
Right.
They just don't. They hold themselves up as an equal, and probably if you're in the chambers, a superior branch of government. But they consider they're completely separate, and they don't like being told by the executive, which way to lean on any given case. Besides his or any executive's lack of qualifications to weigh in, they haven't been confirmed to the court, and they're not a judge. So
it will be interesting, the unintended consequences of disallowing something like this. I mean, if you say that if you do, like you were saying, good luck waiting on the FBI or something. I mean, those agencies just don't have the staff or the resources to go after identity theft unless it's sweeping or has to do with elder abuse or some sort of organization that crosses state lines. I mean, they're not going to handle what's his name down the road from you. They're just not.
We would all blow our stacks if the federal government put on another 100,000 FBI agents to prosecute petty crime, to go after individual lawbreakers instead of kingpins. So yeah, the FBI would certainly go after the person who is dealing in all the identities that they're selling to these individuals. That's absolutely within the purview of FBI, but the one person who's passing themselves off somebody else, yeah, that's not in the purview of the FBI. You just can't be. I mean, the bureaucracy is too big as it is.
Well, of course, we'll all watch these as they trickle down over the next several months and report back because they're interesting. And that's what we're here for, to inform you with half-accurate facts and analysis.
Exactly. Innuendo. So Milton has decided, the city of Milton, which is near Alpharetta, has decided that they are going to put the smackdown on vapors.
These idiots. Go on.
The anti-D-bag bill, as is known. Sorry, vapors, but you kind of are. They're coming down on vapes as if they were cigarettes. I do like the picture on the article is great, and I said this to Jessica too because it's bottom half of a woman's face. She's got a nose ring sucking on a vape pen, which is just perfect for the graphic for someone who vapes.
Yes, but it also implies that this person's like a outsider, rogue, like borderline sovereign citizen. I mean, she's not your Milton soccer mom.
I'm so different. I pierce my nose like everybody else. In the story, man, one metro Atlanta city is working to make it a little harder for children to vape. Yeah.
They're going to limit this, or they're not going to. They've passed this, and it's going to become a local ordinance that you cannot sell. The gross sales from vaping at any shop are capped at 25%.
Right. So if you have a dedicated vape shop, which we have some near where I live, and I actually know somebody who owns a few of these places, that shop can't exist. They just legislated it out of business. So they have to sell something else for 75% of their business.
Tell me how limiting, even putting a vape shop out of business in a city, especially like Milton, that is adjacent to Alpharetta and Roswell and Johns Creek, how does this cut down on child use?
It doesn't. It gets rid of and this goes back to episode 1 where I was, or whatever episode number it was that I was here, where they're talking about Sandy Springs and the strip clubs, is they don't like looking at the vape shops. So if you want to go buy the same product at a gas station, or similar products at a gas station, they don't care. That's fine. That's a gas station. But they don't like seeing these vape shops pop up, and they I guess, see them as seedy.
So, true to form, I posted about this on Facebook and tagged the City of Milton because I was ticked. I don't vape, I don't smoke, I don't have anything to do with this, but it's just such overreach to cap a legitimate business that pays a license fee and an occupational tax and sales tax to you in your city. You're going to cap their sales. So I called them tyrants on social media, and they responded. Their communications director responded and had this long, drawn-out response. But her overarching message was, first of all, they grandfathered in the existing vape shop that's there, which grandfathering in is an odd thing. But this is what she said, both synthetic marijuana and opiate substitutes are often distributed via vape shops and gas stations. By addressing it from both a product and a distribution standpoint, we are better positioned to positively impact the ease of access by our local youth. Our council is committed to ensuring the public safety and welfare of our residents, and our residents have expressed concerns regarding this issue and support these efforts. No two communities are alike, and what works for one doesn't work for another. And then she went on and said that they respect that I have a different opinion and all this other garbage that they don't actually believe. But it is not a local, state, or federal government's responsibility to address distribution from a sales perspective
of a legal product.
That's right.
Now look, what she's talking about with the synthetic marijuana and opiate substitutes. Okay, Kratom, which I guess people like. I've never tried it, but Kratom is one of those things, and I don't know anybody who will sell to anybody under 18. And I guess she's talking about CBD, because you can get CBD to drop into a vape. CBD is absolutely legal. It's legal to consume.
And there is synthetic CBD.
Right. Now, I'm sure she's not talking about marijuana vapes, which do exist, which I was surprised to find out are a felony. When I saw one of the busts, if you cook it into an oil and put it in a vape pen, it becomes a felony. So she's talking about two other legal substances. Now, if the government has a problem with Kratom, if the government has a problem with it, if they want to address Kratom, at least have the legislative courage to say, hey, we're going to go after Kratom, or we're going to go after CBD, which would be a horrible idea. But
What's interesting is that kratom, yes, you can overdose on it and you can have problems with it, just like any substance just about. But it actually is being used to combat the opioid crisis. And Milton is the hub of the heroin capital up there with Alpharetta and Johns Creek and Roswell and Cobb. Like, they have an epidemic up there. And so they're banning something that combats it.
Well, and they're also cracking down on something that has been used as a tool to get people off of cigarettes. Mm-hmm. Now, look, I was in a meeting not long ago, and a friend who's on the city council came up to me and was talking about vaping being a big problem in the schools. I said, what do you mean big problem? And he's giving anecdotes about people, kids being caught in the bathroom with vapes. I'm like, the biggest problem is that's like really, really uncool. We just smoked in the boys' room. It's a problem for individually for the kids. They should not be consuming tobacco products. But as far as an epidemic that needs to be addressed, no. And in fact, most of the rebel kids when I was in high school that smoked didn't go on to smoke through the rest of their lives. It was just a rebellion thing.
And on top of that, you're talking about close proximity where you can just hop in the car and drive 5 miles down the road to get it somewhere else. This is not our town. This stuff is garbage.
Or to a gas station.
Right.
Because they keep the what do they call them? There's a blue and there's something else that I've heard advertised on the radio. They keep them right next to the cigarettes. So if your goal is to get tobacco or to get nicotine without getting the smoke, there you go. And when I was in high school, I went to high school in Georgia. I grew up in Florida, but I went to high school up here. It was dipping. It was kids walking around class with a Coke bottle in their backpack. It's old story. And every generation likes to pretend like this is the end of the world when the kids get into something. I think New York City is where you can't sell flavored vapes. You can only be tobacco flavor. You can't sell cherry passion fruit or whatever the hell they put in those things. Fruity Pebbles. Got a friend who vapes. Like, man, what smells like Fruity Pebbles? Oh, that's me. I'm like, D-bag. I'm so understanding.
I support your ununderstandingness.
But
I don't support this crap.
I support your freedom to be whatever you want. And if you want to wear a man bun and suck on a lightsaber and put water vapor out of your mouth, go right ahead. On that cheery note, remember, we started on a high note.
We did, so.
What do we have any closing thoughts?
There's a lot we didn't get to. I guess I would just say tune in next week because we had more topics.
We did. By the way, these have been our opinions and not necessarily those of All on Georgia. If you like our opinions, go ahead and give us 4 or 5 stars. Give us the max amount of stars all the way to the right. And be sure to tell your friends. Interact with us on social media. Send us friend requests.
What the hell?
Especially Jessica.
Don't reach out. Don't call. Don't write. Just give us the stars and download the podcast.
Jessica at allingeorgia.com.
You jerk.
Is that actually your email address? I was making it up.
Yes.
Hopefully Matt will be back next week. But be sure to like and share the podcast, and we certainly appreciate it. For the absent Matt Lowe, who's chopping wood, Jessica Szilagyi, I'm Dave Roberts. Have a great week.
Have a great week.